yours is the floor.
Well, thank you. You create such an expectation. You go there? Stay
I
here.
think so.
Yeah. So, if I am obliged to go there?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm
I
not there to oblige
If
you
I am
to
obliged,
do
I
anything.
go. I take my papers. Thank you, Ricardo. You create such a big expectation that I better stop here, you know. But oh, I need the clock in order not to be too long. Eh?
The clock? The water?
Oh, the water. Well, anyway. No, I don't want to be too long because I want that we have a dialogue, you know, because it's.
Just to make sure that the dialogue is concrete, here are the numbers.
Yeah. The numbers are not important, you know. No, look, thank you for this invitation and thank you for your very kind words. I clearly know that this is to be organized inside the dialogue of the Year of China. And I have to say you that I am absolutely ignorant on Chinese art. I know very little of Chinese history, you know. I cannot talk about the past. I am simply trying to understand what is happening in the future with a special accent on Europe. But it's difficult to divide the problem of the relation of China vis-à-vis United States and Europe, you know, because there is a very strong interplay. As any good professor, I start with some obvious statement, you know, because otherwise you shouldn't be a professor. The obvious statement is that everybody now is convinced that the 21st century will be the Asian century after 2 centuries of European domination and 1 of United States domination. Simply, I tell you that this is not obvious from the historical point of view, because in 20 years ago, it was clear that 22 years ago, it was still clear that this was the American century again, you know, and only in after some change, after the Iraqi war, after some transformation, people started to understand that the world change was much bigger and much quicker than we could imagine, you know. And really, I started to be, let's say, active in China in 1984, and I was betting on China, but I didn't think that was so quick, you know. And I tell you why I started to take interest on China, you know. I was in that time president of IRI, that was the biggest Italian state-owned conglomerate, and we had to make a big investment in Soviet Union, you know. It was still Soviet Union in '84, and we started the plant. There was a seamless pipeline, you know. Seamless are the big pipes for drilling oil and so on and so on and so on. And we started it in close to the old Stalingrad. We worked 2 years. Then the Chinese government asked a twin plant, you know, in Tianjin. And we started the plant. We finished the Chinese plant, and the Chinese technicians went to Soviet Union to help the handling of the Soviet plant, you know. So I really, for me, it was absolutely having 2 different worlds, you know, say, look, this is the big menace to the United States, Soviet Union, impossible. The real challenge is that one. You know, the same twin plant, you know, you have, it is difficult to have such a social experiment, you know, in your eyes, you know. And I learned step by step how the Chinese new economy, because in that time it was, I repeat, 91, the revolution started, the economic revolution started in 1978, and so it was not the beginning, but still in the first phase of it, you know. And then I followed day by day what was happening in China, and I think that I was not wrong to understand that the revolution was really, even if I had this case in front of me, I underestimate the possibility of such a continuous growth for such a long time, because it never happened, you know. And then, of course, when India started to grow, then, you know, this the entire economy of Asia started to change. I understand that this is a world change, you know. When you read, everybody of you probably has read in New York Times, I think 22 of January this year, when the people managers went to Obama to talk about, and they explained that they assemble everything in China through a subcontractor that is called Foxconn, a small company of 1.5 million people, you know, in which 250,000 work for Apple. And they explain a new strategy of robotizing the assembly line, reducing manpower to, I don't know how many, but 30,000 or a year. And then, of course, the discussion was, okay, the added value in Asia, in China, is very small, you know. It is now $16 per iPad will be $7, $8, you know. And so why don't you bring the assembly line in California? The cost of labor is negligible? No. And the answer was unbelievable, you know, because the supply chain that we have in Asia now is the most efficient of the world, and what is done there because of this interaction between China, Japan, Korea, and the quick response has go so far ahead that we cannot find, not even in the United States, the cluster that make this possible. And, you know, he didn't mention cost of labor in the answer. They mentioned this new, and so clearly it is a new challenge. It's a new challenge. And it's a new challenge to Europe, and it's a new challenge to the United States, you know. And the new challenge, you have another test of this new challenge. When we had the Fukushima disaster in Japan, a lot of Chinese companies stopped for a while. When we had floods in Thailand, the same. So we have now a huge, big, enormous Asian cluster that starts to work together, you know, and this is something that nobody expected, not me, even if I was teaching industrial organization, you know, this failed, but I couldn't, you know, and the European answer, there is an answer, but not organized at the European level, at the German level. Let's say after the enlargement of the European Union, Germany has started to build a cluster of European companies, but not so interlinked and so quick than that. And not including all Europe, you know, but including only neighbor countries of Germany, let's say Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Northern Italy, but with completely different with other countries, you know. And to give you just an example, in Germany, in this moment, you have around 25% of German GDP is given by the source is manufacturing industry. Means manufacturing only, without construction, without service linked to industry, you know, manufacturing. And now in France is 11 United Kingdom is 10%, you know. So you have this new cluster in Europe that shape the world in a different way, you know. And this is the reason why more and more Obama calls Mrs. Merkel by telephone and not anymore the British Prime Minister, you know, because it's a new reality that it's shaping step by step in Europe, you know. Nobody thinks to this deep change, but they happen, you know. And when you find them, it's like the problem of the pipeline factory, you know. You start to understand that the thing is changing much quicker than anybody of us was thinking, you know. So it's clearly from this point of view, we could have a Europe that can give in special sectors, especially luxury goods, or even in non-high technological goods, an answer to China. But we have not a common European policy that will be able to give this answer. So my general conclusion is that the relation, then we go to analyze it, but the relation between China and Europe, you know, the spirit of this relation is absolutely strange, because the Chinese love Europe, you know. They, as a tourist, they love to come to Europe. They are really taken by the European history also, because of the terrible colonization, because of their previous relations, you know. And they love to call the existing period of China Renaissance. That is a European terminology, you know. But it's some sort of disappointed laugh, you know, because they should like to have Europe as an interlocutor. And so, but they are always vis-à-vis United States, you know, with Europe that is coming out but never delivers because of the political problems of Europe. And to be very concrete, the problem, you know, when I was president of the European Commission, it was before Christ, you know, anyway. It was the year in which I went to China to tell that with Chirac. It was, if I remember well, 2001 or 2002, you know. And we, after, you know, long discussion with our European counterpart, we told to the Chinese government, okay, in due time, but certainly not a long time, we shall resolve the two problems, the two obstacles that divide a stronger cooperation between China and Europe. That is the market economy status recognition and the arms embargo. The arms embargo is very delicate, because then I shall get into. But the economy status recognition is absolutely not influential. It's just some sort of pride problem. And of course it was clearly, and then in any case, will be recognized before, I think, 2016, because of the rules of the WTO. And Europe was unable to agree on delivering this simple fact, you know, because you had always some country who didn't accept this, and because you need unanimity, we didn't deliver that, you know. So you have this strange situation, you know. Trade is increasing, and as I promised you, I shall not give you many figures, but now the biggest flow in the world is trade between Europe and China, with a surplus on the Chinese side, a substantial surplus. I shall not give you the satisfaction to read the figures, you know, but is very interesting that all the European deficit is with China. If you take European external trade, without China, we are in a balanced situation. With China, we are hundreds of billions in deficit. But if you divide Europe in Germany and non-Germany, German has a surplus even with China. You know, to underline what I told you before, you know. And this is one of the great problems that we have in Europe, you know, because it's the difficult to take decision is not only because you have politicians who are not forward-looking or you know, they don't understand the situation, but also because we have so different interests that public opinion thinks that you can go on with the existing situation even without changing any policy. So the real fact that nobody knows it, or nobody underlines that while China, except last month that was decreasing, but till 3-4 months ago had a surplus in external trade around 5% of GDP, that is an enormous surplus. Germany had 5.2% surplus in GDP. They say the real China in the world is Germany, you know, not China. You know, this is the strange fact, and you understand why it's so difficult to have an agreement, and why you have this temptation of many of the German public opinion and many politicians to say, let us split the euro, you know, because we are so strong. But if you split the euro, your surplus will disappear immediately, because when there was no euro, Germany had no surplus, because all the other European countries devaluated. And as I repeat always the example of my home country, I am Italian, and when I started my academic career, the rate of exchange of the Italian lira with the Deutschmark was 145, 145. When I signed the entrance of the lira in the euro with the Chancellor Kohl, it was 990. Let's say Italy devaluated 600% in 35 years. You know. And France did the same, was 500 something, you know. So all European countries did that. So we have this terrible contradiction in the European policy, in which everybody understands that only with the euro you can play a role in the world, but your public opinion is so biased that they think that helping the weakest part of the member is a bad deal, because they don't take account advantage that you have with a big trade area. And this is absolutely difficult to solve, you know, because it's a political problem. It's not, you need really the leadership that Chancellor Kohl had when we did the euro, and that it was stating, you know, look, my German fellows, they don't want the euro. They want to stay to the Deutschmark. But I want the euro because I want a European Germany, not a German Europe, because I know which were the consequence of that, you know. But to do that, you need to have politicians who understand that, who know that you know, and the problem of the relation between China and Europe are really a problem of how the Chinese can work in the long run with a, let's say, strong strategy, and also without democratic rules, you know, but with the ability of taking this decision, and we have not, you know. In order not to be too academic, I want to summarize you in one of the last meetings I had with one of the Chinese authority on discussing relation between Europe and China, you know. it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Communist Party, not the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the party. They say the man who dictates the rules for foreign policy, you know, coordinate the rules. And it was a charming, interesting conversation, you know, worrying for me, because he was discussing the relations, you know, and telling, look, difficult to have long-range relations with you because you are only thinking to the short term. You have always elections, you know, and I answered, thanks God. But then he was analytical in explaining you have local election, regional election, provincial election, national election, European elections, and this is okay. But with the opinion polls, all the election, even the most local election, become national elections because they project, you know, but if you look at the United States, it's not only a European fact. If you look at the United States, think to the local election, senatorial election in Massachusetts when Ted Kennedy died, you know, the Democrats had 60 to 40 majority, and they lost one seat. It was important because also of some rules in which to approve some bills you need 60 votes, but it was not such a big change. It was a local election in Massachusetts. The American public opinion completely changed, you know, and so it told, you know, you European, you know, but not you Western people, you never think to the long term. You think only to tomorrow, you know, and so how can you tackle the problem of research, development, long-range welfare state, the structure of the pension, all these problems that must have a long. And then, in the end of the conversation, he told me, Professor, I'm very worried for the future of your democracy. So look, I had some objection, you know, but you know, the priest was not the right priest, but the sermon was the right sermon, you know, because we have really to think, you know, when we talk about the challenge, you know, look, I didn't mention technological aspects, you know, I mentioned only, you know, that in this global world you need a clear set of political rules in order to take decisions. Otherwise, we will never get the results, just because we need long-range investment, long-range strategy, long-range politics, you know. And this is the problem, you know, that we have in the relation between China and Europe, you know. How can you have, with a partner, with this type of hierarchies, how can you have long-lasting relations, cooperation, cross-investments, and all that, you know. So when you read in the newspaper, especially in Spanish, Italian, and French newspaper in the last months, you know, China will help the European monetary program buying bonds and so on, so completely foolish, you know. The Chinese will buy bonds if the long-term view of the bonds will be clear, you know, and so they will buy bonds, and they told me, honestly, directly, we should be very happy to buy bonds, but please give us the message that we need in order to make long-term investments, you know. And so the result is that there is this strange fascination between China and the United States, you know, strange because it's hate and love, continuous hate and love, you know. And we shall have some months of hate because before the election no American can give any prize of China, otherwise you lose elections, you know. So it's, like in Germany, you have the business community divided from the common public opinion, and the business community will never agree on the dissolution of the euro, even if common opinion does. The same, very similar aspect is in the United States, in which you have on the political side, you have, this sort of challenge to speak against China, to bash China and so on. But from the economic part, there are all the big investors in China that are very scared and very worried to think to some sort of tension, increasing tension vis-à-vis China, So we are living in this moment of contradictions, But in spite of that, the world is still going to change, and when the crisis will end, the strength relations will be completely different from they were after the crisis. The BRICS, they will overcome the income of the former G7. That is an event that, I repeat, absolutely the change of the world before 2040. Probably in 2030, 35, you will have all the G7 together will have an income GDP less than the BRIC, and so the change of the world is already done, And in this deep change, coming back to the strict European-Chinese relation, there is a Chinese desire to have to move more freely in the world without having any clash, only direct clash with the United States, and so the role of Europe is needed, and it's true that they will never buy number of bonds without knowing, but now the Chinese reserves in euro are already, well, there are no official figures, but in the best guesses are more than 20%, around 22, 23% of all the Chinese reserves. That is a very big involvement, And when we did the euro, I do remember that I had on that 3 meetings on to give you the Chinese attention on the euro and on Europe. We had the regular meeting every year with the Chinese president, the so-called China-Europe summit. And it was absolutely charming and fascinating to see that the Chinese president, when you go to this meeting, you go with such a big dossier, in which there is everything, the quality of honey and the standard for the shoes, everything, in it, And the Chinese president was absolutely not interested to any dossier except to the euro, And the idea was, look, it's true that the Deutschmark and the French franc will disappear. I say, yes, they will disappear. But you will have a paper, different paper. Yes, we shall have a different paper, as you have the dollar, There is no written in God we trust, because the Europeans, from this point of view, they trust more in money than in God, in Geld than in God, in gold than in God. But anyway, and then we can have the reserves in euro. I think I advise you to have that, And then in the third meeting, when the euro was done, you remember, somebody will remember that the euro went down for 1 year, in the beginning. Instead of increasing, it went till 0.89 or one day 83 or 82 also, with the dollar, So, of course, I was going to the third meeting a little worried, you know, and Chinese president told me, look, you have given me a very bad advice. Okay, I say, look, but I shall go on buying euros because, first of all, we'll go up, and he did a good business, so my advice was not so bad. Second, I want to live in a world in which there is no one in command, but more than one. And because the dollar is the symbol of power, I do prefer to live in a world in which you have a dollar and a euro. And the reason why now China has as many dollars as the euro is because of European new phase in which after the euro, after the enlargement, Europe has lost faith, you know, because of globalization, because of Chinese competition, because of immigration. You didn't have any more the spirit of unity that was pushing us when we had the euro, you know. And I do hope that this will come back, at least by necessity. But, you know, the historical change is an incredible, deep change. So now the relation is 64% of foreign currency, foreign reserves in dollars, and 22 in euros. You know, but in the idea was to have some, let's say, third player, not to be alone vis-à-vis United States. You know, also because it is clear that in terms of foreign policy, Europe will be less and less menacing because of a lot of reasons. You know, and but ending this. My time is going to the end because I repeat we have to discuss on these issues, and then if you need also some figures I can give them. Now it's not easy to reconstruct that. Even if in the new phase China should do even more Europe, you know, because China. We are not accustomed to analyze the Chinese documents, you know. But if you read the 12 5-year plan, you know, it's a great change. It's a great change of the country. You know, the basic 5-year plan that have changed the history are the fifth, it was 1976 to 1980. It was the post-Mao reform and the changing of the rules. Then the ninth, it was the change of the rule of the public companies and the rule to the private companies. And this is the 12th 5-year plan, that is 2011-2015. Is in it has an enormous change from investment to consumption, from let's say a policy dedicated only to growth to a policy worried on the problem of equality among regions, equality among countryside, and metropolitan areas. This was absolutely a necessity for a country which already half of the people live in the urban area, in which the disparities of the region are still big, in which welfare state disappeared and has to be reconstructed, in which when you arrive to this more than $5,000 per year of income, people starts to have, let's say, to ask for, to be more interested to politics, to desire to understand, to get into the problems, you know. Well, in this moment of change, and so the new 5 years plan is the answer to the necessity of change, you know. So, and it's quite interesting because never as it happened now, the Chinese leader are insisting that China is a developing country. That before, when it was very poor, they didn't insist on that, and now you say you insist on that to push on the fact that you have to completely change the policy of the country. Will they do that? Will they? And you know, even the problem of growth is quite interesting. You know, you read very often, especially in the financial press, that China is in a deep crisis and so on and so on and so on. But when you go from 9.5% to 7.5%, you know, certainly is not the same. But 7.5 in a country that is already middle income is a fantastic growth, you know. And everybody knew that you couldn't go on with two figures growth when for such a long time, you know. And China is growing since 30 years, you know. And to do that, you must be very careful, you know. And clearly now in China you have this intellectual split on the growth, you know. Let's say people who think that China is like a bike, in which if you stop you fall, and others that they think that look, the turmoil, the changing, the immigration process is so deep, so that you have in some way not to stop, but to push it away, you know, and this is clearly, as an economist, I tell you that I do think that the decision taken in order to slow down the economy after a big investment bubble, real estate bubble, and danger inflation, I think has been wise, you know, and it was needed, you know, clearly. The real question mark is how will be the political situation, you know, because being in China so often as I am, you know, it's quite a strange feeling, you know, because if you think, if you analyze the famous episode of Boxy Lie in the last months, you know, and probably you know better than I do, so I don't want to repeat it, but it was clearly one of the leaders of the so-called Maoist faction, you know, with a very interesting personal history, a very intelligent man, you know, and it went in disgrace when his right arm went to the American consulate, you know, and escaped and so on and so on. And it was absolutely interesting that everybody was talking about that in the elite, let's say, in the university, and you had no news in papers and no news on television, you know, but millions of people were talking on this problem, on the political consequence, on that, you know. And so I'm stressing that because the Chinese society is changing so quickly, you know, in terms of, you know, of reality. From one side, they discuss much more openly on politics, on even in the classroom, more numerous than that, you know. And from the other side, you are more and more self-conscious, you know, and students have a completely different attitude, you know. I end with this that could be an anecdote, but it's a feeling, you know. The first time I went to teach in the Shanghai Business School, you know, of course it's elite, and you pay so much money that you must be very wealthy and you must speak English and so on. It's not China, but anyway, it's and you know, they asked me, what do you expect of China for the future, you know? In 3 words, I thought, look, I do expect a growing cooperative China. Oh, bravo, Professor. Okay, it's a very good definition. This year they asked the same question, and of course I've given the same answer, a growing cooperative. But the reaction was not the same. What do you mean for cooperative? You mean that we must be in line with your policy? And it's obvious, you know, because when a country wakes up, and China is waking up with all the problem that this now China must make. This is why they need Europe, you know, and they should like to have Europe, you know, because a day or another day China will be involved in some big political issue, you know. It's if you analyze the international policy till now, there is one clear picture: that China never entered in any trouble. The rule is, when there is a trouble, there is no China. Iraq, Afghanistan, you listen. But when you are present in 50 different countries with your workers, with a lot of people, you know, statistically, you will have a trouble someday or some other, you know. With my Chinese friend, I told which should have been, well, they had 38,800 workers in Libya. 38 and 8 is a big number, you know. And it was a fantastic show. In 4 days, they have been all brought to China. And when I asked why to China and not wait nearby, they said because it will be a long war with deep consequences. And that was clearly. But so my question is, look, but what will happen if 1,000 of them will be kidnapped? You know, because it's a question that you have to pose. You know, when you make a world politics, you must, you know, this is why, you know, the problem of China is China will be certainly one of the big protagonists of the world. And I do hope that the responsibility that will follow this policy will be taken. Leadership needs rules, needs responsibility, needs alliance, you know. So in the second phase of a political growth, you cannot simply not avoid to be in trouble. It's not enough, because you will be in trouble. So there will be this policy, you know, and so my conclusion is that till now, the Chinese policy vis-à-vis Europe has been, I think, a policy of asking for movement. The European answer has been impossibility to move because of the internal division, but I think that is a mutual interest to have increasing cooperation and to have a European more assertive than we have now. I finish it.
Well, I have been asked to be the moderator. It's not very clear what I should do, but I will try to do my best. I think that you have presented quite a number of issues here. And probably the first question would be, how important then, if for China it's important to have Europe, then how important is to have a rather much more unified Europe to be able to play the role that China would like to see Europeans are able to play?
Here is the point, and as I hinted, we live in a contradiction, you know, because my opinion is that the euro will not disrupt. There is no interest anybody to do it. So Europe will stay united and will go on with the cooperation. But in the long run, let's say, we shall have in front of us a waving period in which you have this summit without any conclusion, in which, France and Germany pretend to be equal. They don't want to open the cooperation to other countries. And so you have this situation. One day, Greece is under threat. The second day, Spain, and then Italy, and then Spain again, So this will cost a lot to Europe for the short term. In the long term, we have no alternative. This is what I think, because I think if Germany gets out of the euro, because the idea of having two well-ordered euros or 3 ordered euros is completely foolish. If there is a nuclear explosion, there will be a nuclear explosion. But the German rate of exchange with the, let's say, with the Italian post-euro or French post-euro will not be 1.2 to 1, but 2 or 3 to 1, and they will never will stop selling Mercedes and Audi. They will keep all at home. This is what I think.
Yes. You.
I think you mentioned this in your talk, but there is great poverty in China, and I think you mentioned at some point the effort that they want to address that issue. Why don't you say a little more about that?
Yes. Look, on the direct conversation and statistics that you can read, but also on the direct conversation, I had very deep exchange of view on that. Welfare state in China disappeared. I remember one of the top politicians who told me we have not anymore the bare feet physicians, all the traditional, and the new medicine is very costly only for wealthy people, and this was something that was accepted, Now is not anymore that. You have more and more consciousness, and so it's the steps in this direction are already started, but this is an enormous change, When you will be obliged to start providing pension, health care, school is already provided, and you will change everything. And also, and in China, you will read the debate on rearmament of China. I think they will go very prudent, because they know that they cannot make let's say, a worldwide effort like United States without putting in danger, as United States, or even more, all the structural welfare they can organize. But there is a contradiction on that they are starting to think to that, but there is no Chinese model of welfare already organized. There, on this point of view, also they are fascinated by the American model. And I do remember a long discussion that I had on the health system, telling them, look, but how can you think to have an health system that will be built or inspired to a system in which you spend 70% of GDP on health? Impossible, Your model could be French or Italian, in which in Italy we spend 7%, and the average living is higher than the United States. So the system in some way works, and the Chinese, but here is the political fascination of that, you know. As I told you, it's a strange fact, you know, that will be difficult for Chinese government decide, or a Chinese province decide to have a, let's say, Danish or Italian type health system, you know, because it seems to be out of it's not sexy, let's say, you know, and the real probably, and look, nobody knows how deep is the discussion of soft power in China. It's really an obsession, you know, soft power that they asked me, we had so many discussions, why we are not simpatici, why we are not loved, you know. And this is very interesting because Chinese people is lovable people and so on and so on and so on. And my answer is, look, because we have been so distant for so many centuries that, you know, before loving each other, we must know each other, you know, because, no, really, there has been a separation that is unbelievable. And then you need a football champion, you know, or let's say a rock singer. And this is the way in which you met people. I'm serious now. Yes, I'm serious now because I think that this is and will come. You know, if you analyze the change in China, you know, the Olympic Games ceremony, they were a shock for everybody. You know, normal people. I was looking at them in holiday, you know, and the common people with whom I was looking at television, they were absolutely taken by that, you know. The Shanghai exhibition has been a second step, you know. Now I do expect some technological achievement, I don't know where, in the space or in cancer research, or I don't know where, you know, but I do expect that. And then clearly the problem is also to have football champions, you know, and why they are football fans, you know, and they asked me why we don't win games, you know. And I don't know, I think I have given the right explanation. How could you win playing soccer when your kids study till 5 o'clock? In the evening, impossible. And then there is dark, you know. The Brazilian kids, they play everywhere, you know. So it's, but maybe this is not an explanation.
That's an area where it's possible to have some sort of technical advice. Professor Rosenbauer, and then, yeah.
I think this is a very peculiar moment to discuss relations and decline of Europe, America, and China. Because Europe will not decline if it solves the euro crisis. It will take a long time, but it will not go down over it, I think. If it goes down, then Europe really loses influence in the world very strongly. The United States will not go down because eventually I think even the Republicans will agree to some compromise that people can accept. If they don't, if this December and next January, they can't find a solution, at least a prospective solution to the debt crisis, then America will go seriously down. I doubt that that happens. For China, everything is in the future. And there are two things really in the future. I think, yes, they have to rebalance their economy, and for that it's good to develop the welfare state. So if they have another 20 years, they can deal with the poverty to some extent at least. What is much more difficult is that getting democracy going, number one. It's interesting if you mention Socrates and Confucius. Socrates was condemned to death, but democratically. It was a democratic decision.
Also Jesus Christ.
Responsive to a broad range of male citizens. That is a long responsiveness to the society. even through the Middle Ages, is a long, long tradition in Europe, and it's not a long tradition with variations of what you mean by responsiveness. You can make it look like, but it's not moving towards democracy yet. The other big problem may be easier. The first is democratization, and the second one is, can they really innovate enough to be a leading economy? It's one thing to come up to 5,000, 6,000, and so on, and if you are with 6,000 or 7,000 or 12,000 dollars average income, if you are a democracy, then you have very good chances of staying there. But it's not a guarantee that you get there. But when it comes to innovation, there are many countries that get stuck in the mid-level, of course, and they remain dependent on innovation in America and in other countries. Europe had that problem too after the Second World War, and it has sort of avoided it, I think, relative to America. It can innovate. It doesn't innovate as much as America, and not in all fields, but it does innovate. China isn't there yet. That's the second big problem.
Look, I think your perspective is perfectly correct. But, you know, when you have to do the change, you cannot change immediately. You know, we have to analyze which is the best way to change, you know. Let's say democracy. I know that this is an enormous, important step. From one side, I do think that when you arrive to the level of consciousness, consumption, and information that we have in China now, there will be a big push to democracy. Big push. And I do think that democracy can never be exported, but it will be induced by a change in society. So from this point of view, I'm very optimistic, you know, that this change, and I stressed how the common discussions are changing in the society. And the problem is, will the political power change in a way to guide and to permit this democratization of the society? This is the real question mark. Or there will be a problem in which the leaders will think that the transformation is dangerous. This will be the moment of truth in China. On the problem of technology, I am inclined to think. Well, everybody now says the Chinese are strongly changing, but they have no imagination, you know. Never Steve Jobs can be born in China. Well, I see such an effort in the direction of research, of change, you know, that I cannot think that this will be impossible. Will depend. Of course, you have a strange mixture in the society, you know. Nobody should have never imagined that South Korea could have made such a big progress, you know. I went to see the laboratory in South Korea, and I have been absolutely taken, you know. It counts only 40 million people, that is leading in number one in 6 big sectors in the world, you know, from brown television to portable telephone, desalination plants, big shipyards. Then they are number 4 in motor cars in few years, you know. Only 40 million people, you know. And I have seen that maybe they have no Nobel Prize, but they are the best one in the world to translate invention into industrial product, and is not to be leader in the world. You don't mean that you must have the highest number of Nobel Prizes. The problem is how you change your society in an organic way, like he's doing South Korea. For me, South Korea is something unexpected. It's 40 million. That is this almost the same number of people living in Chongqing. It's so will China, even without the Steve Jobs imagination, organize the way of producing, as I started to analyze in the clusters I described in the beginning of my speech, or not? I know that I am answering to your question with the question, but it's possible.
I want to point to the elephant in the room, the issue of human rights, and especially since we are talking about European Union, Europe and Chinese relations, and we talked about public opinion polls. So how relevant is the human rights? You said that it will change and the democratizing move is on the horizon, but for now, how important is the human rights issue on the European Union and Chinese relations?
Very much, very much. It was on these issues that Europe was broken, And look, I think to be an honest human rights supporter, I do remember the clash I had with the American government for the International Tribunal, but I don't think that to put this issue as a contending issue will help human rights in China. The problem is, politically, I know that human rights are the most important issue in the world, but my point is not to say human rights are more important. How can I help the human rights in a better way? And I do think that opening cooperation, moving the society from inside, I was furious when Bush was talking about exporting democracy to Iraq, because I said, you cannot export democracy. I said, the effort we did in Europe for the enlargement, this was an export of democracy, because the people decided whether to come into Europe or not, and we simply opened the door. So it's, you are right, have been, are the most important, the hottest issues. The problem is how you import that, and really, honestly, I have some disagreement with a lot of political decision taken in this field. It's because change of society will change human rights situation. Even if now, look, in a non-public, in a big convention, you can talk freely on human rights with the Chinese leader if they understand that you are honest and you don't want to be instrumental and get out and make a press conference. You can do really too deep.
Yes?
My question goes back to the question posed by Professor Lagos at the beginning, and it is the bipolarity between the euro and the dollar. And there is a problem within the European Union, and I would like them to ask, so it's more a question regarding Europe than a question regarding the relation with China, but I mean, it's connected to it because you want this bipolar financial system. The dollar is profoundly different from the euro in the sense that if there is a crisis in Oklahoma, nobody questions that the Federal Reserve invest money in Oklahoma. But the moment that you have to invest money in Portugal, then that is the big problem because you don't...
Tell to Mrs. Merkel.
Because you don't have a system, because political totalitarian system in which country, I mean, you have little pockets that traditionally could devalue their money and get out of a crisis. No, they can't. Now they are tied to the euro and they can't use the device of devaluation to put their financial house in order. So here, it is the same thing here, but you must have a central entity like the Federal Reserve that can really help all these pockets. Europe has pockets with no Federal Reserves. Could you please address this?
Well, simply you're right. You know, California budget is much worse than Greece. Who attacks California? Nobody. Because, and who attacks the dollar? The dollar is a big dog. The euro are few cats, you know. And so it's... Oh, we change, as I told you before, we change because nobody has the courage to dismantle, has the interest to dismantle it, you know. And so step by step we'll change, but we shall suffer for a while. But remember that there will never be a bipolarity between the euro and the dollar, because in the meanwhile, the RMB will grow up, you know. And, you know, this is a fantastic change because nobody wants to change the international monetary system, you know. The Americans, they don't want because that's fine for US. And the Chinese say, why to change it now that in 5 years' time we are much better off, you know. So it's, you wish, the next G20, please don't trust to anything that they will tell before the G20, because nothing can happen. Nothing can happen in the real term, you know, because there is no atmosphere to change.
Yes.
Professor, you've talked about financial competition between China and
Look, you have to speak louder and
Louder.
taller, because I'm old.
I said you've discussed financial competition between China and Europe, but in what ways do China and European countries compete over natural resources?
On the
Oil, like,
Natural resources.
yeah, like rare metals, and which European countries are afraid that China might outcompete them for those natural resources?
on natural resources. Oh, look, this is, and I didn't touch it because, you know, I was restricted to something, but this is, the Chinese demand in natural resources has changed the world, you know. Africa started to grow only because of this change in demand of natural resources. So now there is an open competition on that, you know, and, but I am not talking about rare earth yeah, I am talking about oil. Clearly, you have a depression in the world, and the price of oil is on the top of it. Why? Because all the projection of the Asian consumption is increasing so much, and so natural resources will be under competition. But please have always in your mind that when, and will be soon, China will need to be a welfare state, the problem of surplus will disappear. China will have a lot of problems that we have, and so we shall have an even competition on natural resources that now is completely different, because with this surplus, that's China, and then because the long-term strategy, you know, is also in the more important issue. I think to terra rara, how they are called in rare earth, the metals that are very, Professor of Physics, how you call it in English? The metals that are very rare.
The rare earth.
The rare earth, yeah,
Red earth.
everybody say, look, China has imposed a high price on rare earth. That is true. That is true. But look at history. Because the price was not high, we closed all our mines in rare earth. And the Chinese, looking in the long run, you know, they didn't close them. And now, which is let's say, the resources of the rare earth are spread around the world, but the open mines are all in China. But this is not a problem of the Chinese, it's a problem of long-term and short-term view. And in few years, we shall reopen rare earth in Kazakhstan and the United States and where they are. But you know, when I tell you, look, the logic of the short run is terrible. It's because you will find in any field of all our life, and to reconcile democracy and long run is the effort that we must do to save the Western civilization, the European and American civilization. If we don't do it, we are lost in any problem. This is clear case, you know. We can't think to election tomorrow for the problems that are for our children, you know.
Yes, ma'am.
So obviously the United States feels very threatened by the rise of China. Does Europe have that same, do they feel just as threatened, or is it more of an opportunity?
Can you speak louder, please? You know, it's...
Obviously the United States feels very threatened by China's rise in the international state system. So how does Europe perceive it? Is it more of a threat like the United States, or is it more of an opportunity just because it changes?
Yes, yes. Even Europe is very popular to bash China. It's easier to win elections speaking against China than speaking in favor of China. Even if, let's say in Germany, for example, the way is changing because China is, they start to see China as the biggest potential market and the savior. In the last year, there is a change, because when you have companies who are in crisis and the only export increasing is in China or Asia, of course the mind is starting to change. But if you ask to European public opinion, there is still a misopinion, I don't know how to call it, on China, you know. It's not so different than United States, even is more spotty. But this could change in one way, and that is, I feel that if there will be, but I say big if, increasing Chinese investment in Europe, depends upon they have done, but I have seen that in 2 or 3 cases there were ailing companies from Volvo to yacht making Ferretti in Italy or some, that the fact that the Chinese have saved the companies in the area, the Chinese now are heroes, not anymore villains, you know. And so because the Chinese, globally in Europe, the Chinese investment are very low, but will increase if there is a strategy that say, look, to move ourselves, to change, Chinese are useful, the opinion will change.
Yes.
What about intellectual property? How is that being handled?
Oh, this is an unsolved problem. No, it's serious. It's going on. There is some change of attitude in some sector. I have seen the Chinese government condemning the cases, but it's still a big problem. It's still a big problem.
Very clear answer. Yes? No.